Well, we're together again on this sixth and final session of our Reckless Love webcast series. And we take just a moment to say welcome to you. And again, for me to you, thank you for participating and being a part of our study. Then that means those of you who are logging in and being a part of our live chat window. I see Tom Conrad just checked in, so Tom, welcome to you. So it's all of those who are live chatting, which we so appreciate because it makes the experience rich and full. But also those of you who are watching it live, and particularly then those who may be seeing this as a recording. To all, welcome, and we're glad that you're here. I want to get started, and in the student book in your material, I wanted to have us turn together to the very opening page of chapter 6, page number 113. I don't know, the older I get maybe, the more I appreciate Fred Rogers. And sad that he's gone from us in a physical way, but we are still able to learn from him. And, I didn't really grow up with Fred Rogers, and neither did really my kids, not that much. But have learned about him, of course, been very aware of his ministry, we can call it that, I think, with children, and really wider than just young people, really impacting a culture and a generation of people with his kindness and his love. I'm sure you're aware, an ordained Presbyterian minister, and then that very specialized ministry of television, all of those decades of his career. So anyway, they have a quote from Fred Rogers. Tom Berlin offers that to us, and I wanted to just read that aloud so that we could hear it. This is what Mr. Rogers says. If you could only sense how important you are to the lives of those you meet, how important you can be to the people you may never even dream of, there is something of yourself that you leave in every meeting with another person. Isn't that something to think about? Mr. Rogers is saying that there is a piece of us that we leave behind. So our encounter with that person that we've met is more than just the moment, more than just the words we may say, or the look we give each other, or whatever else it is that we exchange. Fred Rogers is saying there's some part of us, some piece of us that now has impacted that person, and it's lasting. And I thought that was, really important to think about, that life really is about being together, and that being together involves this giving and receiving. And there's something that then transcends just the immediacy of that. And it's an impact that, goes on or stays in place way beyond what we might think. So I found that to be, very wise. And of course, that's the theme then for Tom Berlin's writing. And as he gets to this 6th chapter, when he is encouraging us to emulate Christ, and if you put these things together, our call to emulate Christ, to be Christ-like with one another, and then the teaching from Fred Rogers that what we do with each other has a lasting impact, well, there it is. Then as we are able to emulate Christ and live in a Christ-like way and share Christ-like attitudes and expressions with each other, the result of that, the outcome of it, is a lasting touch of Christ in the life of the other and in our lives as well. So there's quite a bit at stake here. This is not just theoretical kind of clinical stuff that we're thinking about. What would it be like? Wouldn't it be nice if? No, this is what we're describing here as real life experience, that there's this piece or part of us that impacts the other, and when that piece or part of us is centered in Christ, this is the key, then we know what the result can be. It can be tremendous and life-giving And of course, in the theme of our book, very loving. So, in the book, at the next page over, page 114, is my first reference there, actually the bottom of 114 and on to the top of 115. Can I read that little section and then invite some thought together before we share a prayer? It says there at the very bottom of 114, interestingly, we cannot have Jesus's hands without Jesus's heart. And we probably won't cultivate Jesus's heart until our hands are accustomed to working in the way of Christ. In order to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, there must be a correlation between our hands and our heart. So that's my invitation on our first point of reflection here tonight is, what is your understanding of what Tom Berlin is writing to us, wanting to say to us here about our hands and our hearts? And as we always say, there's no right answer. This isn't, we're not trying to pass a test here. We're reflecting together. We're discerning together. And so your comments, my comments are all worth sharing. And I'd want to have you have the courage to do that. So as if I need to encourage you at this point, you've been doing a great job with that. So again, the opening question is, what's Tom Berlin getting at here? What's your understanding of what he's trying to say about this hand-heart connection? Of course, since I think about these questions ahead of time, I have the opportunity to also think about some responses. So let me just get us started as you're thinking what you might want to share on that subject. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, and we've heard it before, this is not new, but that love is an action. It's something we do. It's something we experience and offer, and we're partners in this love. Other comments are coming in. Karen says, I think it's all about what we do and what we think. So those things are together, and that connects to the heart, then, I think, is what you're saying, Karen. And Harry says, part of our daily personal prayer is that we should be a positive influence upon anyone that we come in contact with, and then therefore we reflect the love of Jesus. So Harry's saying our prayer life can be exactly that. God, make me an instrument of your love. That phrase, make me an instrument of your peace. Well, it could be, make me an instrument of your love today. Help me as I interact with others to communicate and reflect into their lives what you would have me reflect and offer. In this case, love. So, other thoughts. I had said love is an action. Other things that I had put down is that when we make a commitment to live our life with God, then we are making a commitment that relationship with God will impact our relationship with others. In other words, you can't have one without the other. So it goes together. So the God relationship impacts the human relationship. Sandy says the first thing that pops into her mind is the quote, faith without works is dead. So from Paul's writings, and sometimes hands lead the change. So isn't that interesting that sometimes our activity physically, thinking of mission, can actually change our hearts, or as she says here, sometimes the heart leads the work, and it can go either way then. But they're connected. One impacts the other, and the starting place might shift, but the end result is they are connected. Catherine says we need to show people our love before we can really help people, but Jesus does have a higher standard, and many times she says she fails, but she tries. The trying is important. It really is important to try. Shelley says to take what you know and believe about the love of Christ, and then share that love in Christ, in acting in ways that help others. So what Shelley's saying is this is not just about belief. It's not just about what we say we hold to be true, as if that's just something in our thoughts. Shelley's saying there's an action involved. As I'm talking this out, thank you, in the world, I get that. I'm thinking of the whole Methodist heritage, which was a combination of piety, kind of a holiness in one's life, and then how that connected with a social outreach. So personal piety, personal piety, and then social holiness. So that kind of connection between me and my God, me and my Jesus, but then how the relationship with God and Jesus reaches out into the world. So this whole love thing is obviously, and we learned this, I think, from session 1 onward, not about emotion. This isn't affection we're talking about. This is action we're talking about. And it's good to be reminded of that tonight. Let me share a prayer, again, from out of the facilitator's book, and center us in, and then we'll keep going with our time of sharing together. So pray with me. Creator God, in love your hands fashioned us, and in love your Son stretched out his hands on the cross to save us and refashion us as your people. By your Spirit, may we raise our hands and hearts to you in this time we have together, that we may more fully answer your love with the work of our hands. Amen. So there you go. There's that heart and hands connection again. I want to turn to the video right away here this evening, the video segment. And tonight we're going to meet a friend of Tom Berlin's. His name is Mark Miller. He too is a clergy, a pastor. And I think you'll find this helpful and interesting. I was quite taken with some of the personal sharing that Mark does around experiences in his family. So you may want to be listening for that with me. And then we'll come back together, debrief a little bit from the video, and then move on to some other aspects of the chapter as we keep going through session 6, okay? So for now, I invite you to check out the video. We'll be right back, and enjoy.
I'm really excited to have Mark Miller with me today. He's a pastor, colleague, and he's a really good friend. We've been on a lot of trips and journeys together, spent a lot of time talking, and I think you're going to learn a lot.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Tom.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Hey, thanks for being here.
Oh, you bet.
Let's go for a ride.
All right.
So Mark, how long have you been a Christian?
Well, I want to say my whole life, but that's probably not accurate. I went to church when I was young. I think I came to grasp the basic understanding of the gospel when I was about 14, 15 years old. So that would make about
100.
Yeah. About 40 years almost.
So you've been a Christian for a long time, and you're a pastor, and
Right.
So you work with people, trying to help them in their Christian life and how to live this out.
Right.
Talk about the importance of the Great Commandment in your ministry, and as people are trying to figure out what it means to follow Christ.
Well, people often struggle to understand the whole message of the Bible in great detail, and there are a lot of different aspects of Christian theology that people sometimes wrestle over and even argue and debate over. But the one piece that everybody can get, because it's so sweeping and so profound, is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Jesus made it basic so we could understand it, but broad so we could begin to explore the depth of it.
Mark, I've heard you say that people are just wired differently in their Christian life. Some people are just it comes so easy for them to learn how to love God. Others, loving people is easy. Other people sort of not being self-centered or self-focused, but taking care of themselves, being healthy.
Yeah.
That's easier for them. I've noticed over the years, you are incredibly self-disciplined. This is one of the things I really admire about you. And you seem to have the love God piece in terms of your devotional life. Talk about that.
Well, I think we do gravitate towards one end of a spectrum or another, whether it's easier to be in quiet and solitude alone with God, or whether it's easier to be with people in fellowship. And I tend to lean more, maybe because I'm a little introverted, lean more toward the solitude with God. And so, yeah, for me, reading the Bible, praying, doing those basic spiritual disciplines help me connect with God and feel that I'm in a loving relationship with God more easily. Loving people is something I have to work at. To get out of my own comfort zone and to get in groups with people and to share life with them. That just takes a little bit more effort on my part. So I think there's some truth to the fact that people have different leanings.
Yeah, it's funny. Often this conversation is about like I'm a good person or I'm a bad person, but what you help me think about is that it may be other issues, being introverted, more extroverted. So there's this scale, contemplative to activist, maybe.
Right.
And it may, your love God, love neighbor, love self. That it may be what's happening in that space.
Yes. Well, I think we all know people in our church who may be wired more towards, I love doing a Bible study, doing the spiritual thing, and then there's others that I want to roll up my sleeves and actually do something for somebody else rather than just have a Bible study. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's just we have a tendency to lean one way or another.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to be self-aware of which way you lean and force yourself to stretch into the other direction. Don't you?
I think so. And frankly, you've really, over the years that we've known each other, you've sort of helped me see that, because you very intentionally push yourself. That introversion part of your personality is something a lot of people don't even know about you. But you intentionally work on that, and so that you really do have relationships with a lot of people.
Right.
And I also think that it's even more particular in that sometimes certain relationships have a season where they're a struggle. Sometimes a marriage can enter into a season where it's in a struggle, or a relationship with a child.
Yeah.
So I recall a time years ago when you were really struggling with your relationship with your son.
Sure.
And you described it to me that you felt sort of a calling to do something about that. Was that out of this life of prayer and the time you were spending with the Lord?
Partially. My son, when he was a teenager, being a preacher's kid, I'm sure that was not easy. The church was really growing, so I was spending a lot of time on the church, and my relationship with my son was very strained. Frankly, I didn't like him.
Well, I was going to say, but you two couldn't be any more dissimilar at that time in his life.
Yeah.
I mean, he was skateboards, and you were like, why can't you play baseball?
And he had purple hair.
Yeah.
And so,
which was hard for you.
Yeah.
Because to my knowledge, you've never had purple hair.
Well, what was funny now was I was embarrassed being seen with him, and I found out he was embarrassed being seen with me.
Don't you think that God did that on purpose? Don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, don't you sort of feel like the Lord going, I know just the boy for you?
Yeah, and I think, Tom, you're really hitting on an important principle. I think a lot of times it's the people we struggle most to love that relationship, that difficulty in the relationship, is often the one where we receive the most gifts in the long run.
Yeah.
It's as though
because they push us and pull us the most.
Yeah. I sometimes believe, and maybe this isn't the easiest thing to grasp, but I believe that love is a skill we develop, not a feeling we feel.
I think that's exactly right.
And so developing the skills of love are learning how to do certain things and do them well, just like any other skill. So
you started into a regime with him, with your son, where you guys went to dinner.
Right.
And you made him do this.
Right. I said, we're going to have dinner. The one thing we had in common, we like Mexican food. So we're going to meet together at 6 o'clock every Monday for Mexican food.
Okay. And I remember the very first time you did this, I was like, you're going to do this. And I was so impressed that you had this heart for your son, that you wanted to do this. And I remember calling you on Tuesday morning and me saying, hey, how did it go last night? And you just said, I said, what did y'all talk about? And you said, we didn't talk, right? Like, did you just sit there?
I mean, I'd ask him questions and get one-word answers. It was hard, and I had to resist the temptation not to lecture, not to correct, but just to get to know him. But over the course of time, it got easier, it got better.
And was that the skill? When you said that love is a skill we develop, was that the skill you developed?
I think so. And I think also it was sticking with it long enough so that my son realized, oh, we're going to have to keep doing this every single Monday, so I might as well start engaging. I think he didn't engage initially because he thought, Dad's just on a kick. After a couple weeks, he'll stop doing this, and it won't matter.
How long did you all do that?
Oh, we did it until he got out of school. In fact, actually, he went to school at George Mason and commuted from Widewater, so we were still doing it for a while when he was still in college. So we did it probably 4 or 5 years.
So you all had dinner every Monday from the time he was about like a junior in high school until he was coming back on Mondays from college to have dinner with you.
Several years.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It actually got to the point where we were looking forward to it, but that took a while.
But had you focused on the feeling, you wouldn't have lasted more than, 2 weeks?
Monday'd come along and I'd say, oh gosh, I got to go have dinner with my son. But then after a while, it got to the point where, I get to go have dinner with my son.
What's something you've had to die to in order to gain the life that Christ wanted to give you?
I've had to die to my need to control outcomes because I'm a person that likes to control outcomes, and I realize I can't always control that. I can only control the processes or what I do in a circumstance. I can't control what the outcome is. So learning to let go of that need to control has been for me a step of love. Going back to my son, for example, I didn't know whether that was going to work out well or not. I had to hope that it would, pray that it would, work that it would, but not know for sure. I had to let go of that control.
Right.
And that actually took some of the pressure off so that I could just relate to my son.
Just be in the moment.
I didn't have to change his hair color. I didn't have to change his skateboarding habits. I didn't have to change who he hung around. I just had to learn to love him.
Because that's what's on you.
Right.
The chapter title, Emulate Christ, invites us to think about how to love Jesus consistently and love like Jesus loved consistently.
Right.
So any last bits of advice?
I'd encourage people to think about this idea that love is a skill we develop, not primarily an emotion we feel. And that when we learn to do the things that love requires, we become more like our Savior, learning to pick up our cross and die to ourselves and engage in acts of selfless servanthood and humility that allow love to flourish in our lives and in the lives of other people.
Hey, Mark, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you sharing your stories and your insights. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be with you.
See you.
All right, take care.
All right, Mark Miller. Nice to meet him and hear some of his story. I have a question I want to put out there. It kind of comes from one of the segments there in the video around the middle part when he was talking about his experience with his son and how dissimilar they were and the tension that they had together. So the question that I posted here is this is something that he said, Pastor Miller, and I just wanted to get our take together on it. He says something like this, that the people we struggle so hard to love can actually become for us the source of the most gifts. So I just put that together in a question. How can the people we struggle to love be the source of the most gifts in our lives? That intuitively doesn't sound correct. So there must be some reality to that or wisdom underneath the surface. And I wanted to see if we could break that open a little bit. So what do you think? First of all, Do you agree with that? And if so, what's behind that? How is that even possible? So Janine says, we're forced to face our own weaknesses and prejudices and then learn to overcome them. So I think what you're saying, Janine, is when we're in this relationship of tension, somehow we experience, or maybe when we're at our best in the midst of that it's not all about them. It's not all their problem. That there's something in us. There's something about us. Like Mark Miller was saying, he realized that his son was embarrassed to be with him. So, it wasn't just all the son's problem. And I think that's what I hear you saying there, Janine, that, we are in touch with our own weaknesses and our own prejudices, then we face that maybe in a more open way than we did before. Okay, I hit that one I got that one correct, I guess, is to infer what you were saying, so I'm grateful for that. Let's see if there's some other comments coming in. Yes. Todd says, we can never have enough empathy. So in the sense that just being compassionate and caring towards others makes a difference. So I guess what you're saying, Todd, is even with those that are difficult to love, if we dig deeper and find a capacity for compassion and care that maybe isn't there on the surface, but if we can grab onto that and apply that, offer that, even in the midst of this tough situation, that something good can come of that. There's a gift or a blessing that can come. Yeah, appreciate that. That's helpful to know. Let's see here. We got Tim coming in with, it's eye-opening when my feelings towards someone change, and it could only be God. So that Tim's just saying, hey, yeah, the transformation in us is absolutely possible. And Tim's experienced it. I think we probably all have at different points in our lives and in different situations. And particularly we're talking about in relationships. So a relationship either starts out or becomes very tension-filled and, all about conflict and just a rub between the two of you. And then God can work a change, and does, Tim says. And it's, God-given. Sue says, look for the good qualities, and then love is more easily appears. So there's some intentionality on what we decide to focus on. Is it only what's lacking in the other that's going to determine this relationship? Or, as Sue says, can we think more positively and begin there? Brian says today's political scene can really strain that aspect. Yeah, culturally, there's not much going on out there that helps us in this regard. So rather than our culture helping to shape our loving attitude, we as Christians more and more need to bring that loving attitude to our culture, right? And maybe that's in one way to think about the calling that God's putting upon our lives and the opportunity that God is making possible for us just now. Carol says every parent has witnessed that good parent has to learn, has witnessed what that good parent had to learn. Yeah. So we've all kind of been there, which is, I think, why that story kind of spoke with some power, at least for me, and I think for you too. Janine said it reminds me of the chapter 1 when Tom Berlin reminds us to start the morning with love, to begin every day that way. And why not begin every encounter with the other person that way? I think that was back in one of the earlier chapters too. Catherine says, learning to accept them for who they are, this is the other that we have the tension with, and seeing more of the gifts that they have to offer. So again, it's this intentionality. And Carol says letting go of control. It's a wonderful gift for her. As you said, it is a gift. Yeah, it really is. To just release that, right? Yeah. Karen says we learn things about that person that were not known before, and then we get to know them, and we also learn about ourselves and how we can be caring and compassionate. And Sandy adds, when we choose to love and develop that skill to love those with whom we struggle, we are gifted with a greater capacity. So it's almost like this chain reaction of love. We start somewhere. It's not perfect, but it's something. And then that begins to evolve and grow and something more. and even something more blessed, we might say, then begins to emerge. And Lisa says, those I struggle to love are either very different from me, some number two, or just don't understand his way of thinking, so similar to me in characteristics that I dislike in myself. There's a lot of that psychologically going on. What we often react to is the very thing that's in us that we don't like so well. So, that comes with experience, doesn't it? As we learn kind of that situation. Doug says, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Oh, this sounds like scripture, Doug. And in our world, we can exist almost exclusively with people who are just like us. Why don't we want to know people who are not like us? Yeah, that's what Jesus said. It's easy to love the people that love us. But that's I think the place where he teaches, but I say love your enemies. Love those who persecute you. So Jesus says, take it to the hardest place and watch what I can do with that. And I hear Doug saying, let's at least give this a try, see what happens. All right. Thanks for that. Now I want to move on because there's another aspect here in the chapter that I found really interesting. And let me see if I can find my reference page is 117. And Tom Berlin lifted up what I thought was a pretty neat metaphor. Did you catch this? I'm going to write this out just so I can get it on the screen. If I can talk and write. Yeah. He referred to it as wake responsibility. Did you catch this? So it's there on 117 and the next page over. And he's talking about boating, which I don't know very much about. But he said that he was on a boat with a friend and they were coming into like a harbor or a dock area. And there were signs there that said, watch your wake. And then the last sign, I think, as you came kind of into where the boats were moored in the dock, your wake is your responsibility. And so Tom Berlin kind of sees that as a metaphor for our life together. And what he was implying here is that he has a feeling we're perhaps not as aware of that as we should be, or at least not enough of the time as we should be. So I wanted to check just to see, what your take is on what he's trying to say to us. What does the concept of wake responsibility say to us is important regarding our relationships? In other words, what's the connection between our wake responsibility, if you get the metaphor, and the impact that it has upon our relationships? So I guess another way to ask that is, what do you hear that metaphor saying to us? Let me give you some thoughts as you're maybe sharing some of the things that come to your mind. One of the things that I thought about in this way with this metaphor is that it's a reminder to be aware, for us to be aware of the context that surrounds the relationship. So that means the context that surrounds my life, not just their life. So, maybe there's stuff happening, maybe there's stuff going on in my life that has nothing to do with this relationship or with this attitude that I'm projecting towards this other person. And yet, it kind of can impact that if I'm not careful. So, be aware of the context, kind of like where our boats are, and the reality of that environment around us and the impact that it's making. So that's one thing I thought about that this metaphor had to say to us. And then the other thing that I liked, and maybe because it really spoke to me, and there's probably a reason why, I think it's suggesting to us that when it comes to one another, when it comes to how we react to one another, relate to one another, respond to the issues of our day, slow down. Slow it down. Have me slow down. Have all of us slow it down to give time to reflect, to give time to think about the consequence of our word or our action. So my wake responsibility means I'm going to pace it slower, and not just respond emotionally or in the moment or without thought. So that spoke to me. Carol says, no wake will save manatees that we don't see but responsible for. So, yeah. So there's very important things under the surface, Carol's saying, just to keep kind of playing that metaphor out. Thank you. Kathy says, the great commandment, are we leaving others with the words, the examples, and the message of Christ? So what do we leave in our wake? Not just how does the wake impact others, but what do we leave behind us, as we're moving through life? And it's suggested by Kathy here that wouldn't it be something if what we left behind were the things of God? And that maybe that's partly, remember Fred Rogers' statement at the beginning here, that we leave some of us with those that we meet. Tim says we're taught to be in the present and then to look to the future, he says. But do we look at our actions, the good or the bad that they cause? So yes, we're in the moment, we look to the future, but you're saying there's another layer to this, and that's what we're trying to get at. Tom says, don't tweet immediately. Oh, yeah. There's a whole conversation we can have about social media, and that allows an immediate response and a somewhat protected, safe response because you don't have to face anybody, right? And yeah, I understand what you're saying there, Tom, and I think it's a good word for our culture to be careful. Words matter, and to take our time and maybe to be more thoughtful before we offer words, whether they're tweeted or spoken. Shelley says, most of our actions have an impact, large or small, on others, yep. And it goes back to the opening quote from Fred Rogers. There we are again. Thank you, Shelley. A good preschool teacher that you are. And you may indirectly impact and you'll never even know it or have imagined. So, yes. And Janine says it's a powerful concept, especially during the pandemic, to be conscientious. And Sue says we should get in the boat, first of all. Jesus had some parables and teaching about boats, and get in the boat with Jesus. And there's that scene where they're in the boat and then Jesus calms the storm and calms the sea. The wake settles down when we were present with Jesus. So this is a wonderful metaphor, really. It just kind of keeps going and going. Be careful of others' lives that you touch or influence. I love this analogy, says Karen. And I do too. I thought I had a lot to offer, and I appreciated Tom Berlin putting that out there for us. So how do we do this? What's the way in which we are mindful, careful, intentional about the impact our lives have on others? Keep in mind that this whole study was really about a reckless love or a difficult love, particularly with those who are different from us. And think about our culture. Think about the issues that we're facing. There's racism, but there's all kinds of other attitudes and assumptions and stereotypes and, categorical ways of thinking that either are indifferent toward others or put them in a place that's cut off from us. So there's all kinds of ways and levels at which we either live this out in a helpful way or hurtful way. So how do we do it better? Or how do we do it more faithfully? So the last part of the chapter gets at some of that. And if you look at page 119, you'll see the first thing that Tom Berlin suggests, as we see Janine's comment, looking at the land, it's like the footprint that we leave. Yeah. So how do we ensure that the mark we leave behind, whether that's a wake in the water or a footprint on land, how do we ensure that that's more Christ-like? Well, on page 119 in the book, what Tom Berlin says is that this model of being servant is a good place to start. And of course, what he refers to there on page 119 and following is the scene in the Gospels, the Gospel of John, of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. In fact, it's worth hearing this together. I know you've heard it, you've read it, but let's lift it up for our time here in our session. Page 120, the bottom to the top of 121. From out of the Gospel of John, Jesus says to his disciples, "So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. And very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." So here, I guess it's even a stronger teaching to us than just a metaphor. This becomes, in a way, a mandate or a command of Jesus to do this for one another. That is, to live into the reality of servanthood. And so I've just got a question for you. In fact, I guess before I ask this next question, let me just read one more statement from Tom Boleyn, and it's right there at the top of 121, right after the scripture we just heard. Just catch that sentence that he writes there. He says, "Our calling as Christ followers is to be servants to the people we love." So I want your reaction to that. What's that feel like to you, to be, in a sense, commanded to love or to serve the way Jesus did? How does that hit you? Harry says, as we're thinking, that he participated in a foot washing ceremony during his Emmaus journey, and it was a powerful experience. And Sue says, the work of our hands is guided by our heart. So I suppose we're saying trust your heart first, and that may enable this servanthood then to take place. We're to love and serve like Jesus. Do you have an emotional reaction to that? Do you have any other kind of visceral reaction to that? And I guess I'm asking because I sort of do. And one of the places I often kind of think about in my response is, well, that's way beyond my ability. That's beyond my reach. I'm not Christ. Are you? Jesus is Jesus, not me. I'm not Jesus. And so, how could I or you or we ever live up to that example of him? How is that going to be possible? And sometimes it kind of feels like we get defeated even before we try. Janine says, well, if we're a servant, then we give up control and trust in Jesus. So I hear what you're saying. That's one of the disciplines that we practice, is letting go and placing it in God's hands and allowing Jesus to embrace the situation, the relationship, the opportunity, the attitude, the expression that we feel kind of welling up in us, that we first then, or what we do is we filter that through the reality of Jesus' love before, it's kind of out there for public consumption. Yeah. Carol says, always feels that same way about servanthood. In this section here, kind of going back and forth just a little bit, he's saying that, we get at it by sacrifice, and that we can't serve without a willingness to sacrifice, to give up something. And Catherine thinks we should be servants to everyone, is not just to the people we love. So just an unconditional act of servanthood. Carol's asking the question, how do we do that? And Tim says, well, being a Christian is to be uncomfortable. And if we are comfortable, we're only comfortable, then the question is, are we being all that God wants us to be? And Brian says, but we should at least try. So yeah, it's hard. It seems beyond our reach. I feel like I'll never be able to accomplish it. And Brian said, yeah, but give it a go. Give it a go. Something's better than nothing. It really is. And Sandy says, servants are not greater than their master. Call to mind the issues of racism and the need to love in heart and action. Yeah. That whole experience of slave and master and the one who's got the power and control over the one who has none. And so there's that disparity between, authority and control. And you can't have love if that's the situation. Love can't be forced. Love doesn't involve restriction. Love is a freeing, enabling expression between two people. And so that leads me to kind of the thing I have been thinking about. There is vulnerability needed in being a servant. When Jesus knelt at the disciples' feet, intentionally positioning himself lower so that he had to look up to them. That created kind of a reverse ordering of what the society at the time thought should be in place. So Jesus intentionally reordered the social expectation where he looked up to the one that the society assumed would be the ones looking up to him. And that reversal then created this experience of intense sacrificial love. Shelley says, I think we're often called to do things that we can't do by ourselves. Realizing our shortcomings and praying, we continue to develop relationships between ourselves, God, and others. So, Shelley, you're reminding us what I think Tom Berlin does toward the next part of this book, which is that we're not in this by ourselves, that God is with us, enabling us to do what we think we cannot do. So if we're there saying, as I did just a moment ago, well, I can't do this. I can't live like Jesus. I can't love like Jesus. I can't serve like Jesus. Shelley's reminding us, as Tom Berlin does, yeah, but God's with us in this, and God wants us to succeed. And God is placing aspects in us and around us and comes up beside us and holds us up from all angles and enables us then to do what we feel we cannot. Doug agrees with Janine, and perhaps giving up control gives control to Jesus. So if we leave room, is what we're saying here, for Christ to take hold, then that's what happens. Christ takes hold. The concern about how we can actually live like Jesus, maybe that's God's concern and not ours. So we ought to just give it a go again. We said that before. Brian Huber said, try it. It's amazing what God can do with effort. I really think that's true. If we just show some effort, some willingness, if we just say, okay, I'll take the first step, then God can make the next part of the journey possible. Shorter people always have to look up to taller people. Okay, Janine, I take that personally. You know what they say about people of short stature? That they, and maybe I'll say we are the last to get rained on and the first to smell the flowers. All right? Hold on to that. Sandy says, yes, but some of us are short, we feel tall. Yeah. Why is that? Maybe some of us are bigger aren't as big as we think we are. That's true too. Hey, we're getting off the subject, but it's good to have a little bit of fun. Because the last section is kind of heavy, and I'm looking at page 125, and this is where Tom Berlin says that it comes down to a death and resurrection experience. So what needs to die in us so that love can rise up? There you go. Try that one. Some things have to die in us in order for this love to come to life. Can you think of things, whether that be attitudes or assumptions, maybe it's actions, maybe it's just some other way of orienting our life or reorienting our life? What do you think? So here's some things. Pride, ugh, Karen says. Ego, pride again. 3 votes for pride already. Judgments. A judging mind sometimes cancels out the potential for a loving heart. Yeah, thank you, Sam. Sue says, our old ways need to die so that the new thing can come in. Oh, you weren't talking about a waffle, an ego? Ego. Yeah, right, Tim. Thank you. Sandy says control again. Our own agenda, letting go of that. Doug says waffles. Beat you to it. Janine says yes, pride, power, control. Carol says we are the only one on this earth. We're not the only one, are we? That's what you're saying. When we think that way, that the whole world revolves around us, gosh, God has trouble breaking through that. Selfishness, as Kathy says. Catherine says, making a comparison and being envious of others, always thinking, well, look what they have, look what I don't have, always being aware of what feels short in me, short, not short in stature now, but, what's a shortcoming that I have, and look at what they possess, and focusing on that. Sure, Catherine, you're not alone in all of that, that we're not the only one. That's what Carol was meaning, yeah. So it's that, all of that, what we're saying, all of that must die. There's kind of these little deaths and burials that happen. And it's probably not a once and for all. It's probably over and over again, that selfishness we need to, bury and leave dead and dying so that a Christ-centered life can emerge and something new can rise up. A sense of inadequacy, Joan says. Thank you, Joan. So let all of that die. And so this dying and rising with Christ is really the pattern of our life. And it is what Tom Berlin is saying is that then enables the creation of a deeper, more faithful, more consistent, more intentional, and more life-giving expression of love. So we can't just say I'm gonna love better. We've got to, according to the preacher here, and that's Tom Berlin, we've got to, in a sense, be crucified. There has to be a dying away of things in us that are in the way. Yeah. And then this love can flow. Well, friends, it's been so good being in this study with you, and thank you in the midst of the summertime and this crazy wild world, experiencing it with me on the very last page of the chapter before the epilogue, which, by the way, I think, go ahead and read the epilogue if you didn't. It's kind of a nice summary statement. But I wanted to come to page 130 where he again underlines one of his themes, which is our calling is to not only know we are loved, but we are to be loved. So we are beloved, or we are the beloved, and we are also called to be loved. And of course, those are the phrases of each of the 6 chapters that puts that phrase together for us. So good stuff. And I want you to think with me more and more, how that applies in real time in our real world. Related to that, let me share an invitation with you as we close out this webcast. One of the next opportunities that we'll have to be kind of virtually learning together is a new kind of special program that's going to be happening in September. So let me just share the announcement about it. And it's called Keeping the Conversation Going, or something very similar to that. yeah, keep the conversation going. I did have it right. And it uses both film, some movies, and then time to debrief and discuss together conversation and learning about racism, how we find our place in the midst of that, how we can work through that and kind of come out in a different place, helping to both dismantle racism, but also in our own lives, strengthening, making our expressions toward others more loving. So you're going to see more information about that. Actually, if you go to our church website, you can see right there on the front page a link that'll take you to read about it. You can register for it. We're going to be putting together these online classes, and there'll be, again, 3 movies and 3 discussion sessions, and that'll go through every couple weeks starting in September. So, look for the details of that, and I'll be a part of it along with, I know Sandy Huber's going to be a part of it. She and her group really are at the forefront of pulling this together for us, and a couple other staff members are working on this. So just wanted to lift that up. So I would like for you to be a part of it. I think Sue says she's already signed up. So great. And then I'm always on the lookout for something that we can do and share in. And it's great when something like this fits so well with the reality of the world. That doesn't always happen, but it certainly did this time around. And I think that made it especially meaningful to us. So check out this September film and discussion series, Keeping the Conversation Going. And I think that'll be worthwhile. And, just keep in touch. We have a lot of stuff out there online. Our worship every week. Other opportunities to be in devotion and prayer. Kim's got a great series coming up here in September. Every day, actually throughout the whole fall, we're going to be posting a very brief devotional video on beauty, where we see beauty in our life and in our world, helping us focus on that which is life-giving. That's going to be cool. So I think you'll like that. Okay, well, let me just check out one thing here, and there you go. I guess I'll put that out there. All right, Karen. There. Yeah, Karen, they didn't let you post the link, but there it is. It's out there. So that's cool. We can share that. All right. Okay, friends, enough for me, and thank you for all you're doing. Take care. We'll sign off, and I'll bring the music up. And you just have a great rest of the evening. Take care.